I choose death. I can destroy your kingdom, Bane, by murdering your subjects, and I can starve your kingdom, Merkul, by staying my hand. And so I shall build a kingdom of my own, of those who decide who lives and dies, and where you both shall kneel before me. Hello and welcome, my friends and viewers, to this week's episode of Legendlore, where I draw and talk about monsters, characters, gods, and other things from D&D 5th edition, while giving a small but quickly digestible history about them. Together we'll go over their origins within the game, how they're utilized in the modern edition, and how you guys can utilize them in your own games. Join me this week as we will be covering the dark god of ritualistic murder within the Forgotten Realms, Bhaal. Before he was a god, Bhaal was but a man, a power-hungry adventurer who, along with his companions Bane and Merkul, sought to attain the portfolio of Jergal, the god of the dead. The three were able to travel to Jergal's domain, and the god willingly offered his realm and power to the Dark Three, resulting in a vicious squabble that only ceased when Jergal suggested that they play a game to divide his power amongst them. After a rousing game of knucklebones, Bane emerged the victor, choosing first and claiming the domains of hatred, strife, and tyranny for himself. Merkul, coming second, chose to rule over the dead themselves, doing so to spite Bane, as death was the ultimate fate for all, and so he would command all of the dead, including Bane's own minions in life. Bhaal, the last of the three, chose the divine province of the act of death itself, as he hoped to draw power from the ending of life, reveling in its act in the many forms that it could take, from the murders of vicious killers to the righteous smiting of paladins. Bhaal was originally the patron deity of assassins and their victims, but eventually common murderers used his presence to justify their own actions, which ended up warping his manner of worship and becoming less refined and meticulous and planned. When the time of troubles came, Bhaal lost his powers and was forced to walk the realm as a mortal like all the gods, and unfortunately was slain by the upstart mortal Cyric, using the sword known as Godsbane. In truth, Godsbane was but the chosen form of the god Mask, and Bhaal's death allowed Cyric to steal elements of his divinity and portfolio. There's also no doubt that Mask also benefited from the death of this god as well. However, Bhaal was immensely clever, and foresaw his own death to come during the time of troubles, and thus went about securing his own life by fathering children by many mortal women. This act created his heirs, known as the Bhaal spawn, who were involved in a series of conflicts and infighting before one stood above the others, ultimately foiling Bhaal's plan to return through his children for a time. This would actually be the plot of the D&D-based video game Baldur's Gate 2, The Throne of Bhaal. In regards to his active clergy at the time of his death, many urban Bhaalists were very quick to convert to the worship of Cyric, whom they referred to as Cyric Bhaal in a sort of amalgamation of the two. Those who worshipped him within more rural areas maintained their original faith, and a schism grew between the Cyric Bhaalists and the dregs of his remaining original followers. In time, due to their loss of power upon the death of their god, the original Bhaalists were either killed or eventually converted by force to the worship of Cyric. If you guys want to catch up a little bit more on Cyric and his own lore, there's a link in the description to check out Cyric's legend lore. Despite the loss of his clergy though, this would not be the end for Bhaal. For the last known Bhaal spawn, a man known as Abdel Adrian, resisted his murderous impulses caused by his lineage and became a famed and beloved figure within the city of Baldur's Gate. However, another Bhaal spawn by the name of Vakan attacked Adrian while he was in the middle of a speech, and while the ultimate winner of the duel wasn't exactly known, the victor, being the true last of the Bhaal spawn, transformed into a massive, blood-soaked creature and began to rampage through the city, stopped by the efforts of a group of adventurers. This is the events of the D&D 5th edition module, Murder in Baldur's Gate, which I highly recommend checking out. With all of his children dead, killed by each other's hands, Bhaal's essence was finally freed. He returned and reclaimed the murder domain from Cyric, but the Lord of Murder was no longer a complete deity. He was effectively still mortal, left to reconstruct his clergy and restore his worship in the hopes of returning to true godhood. The clergy of Bhaal, known as Bhaalists, is a disorganized network of local cults with both urban and rural branches, often keeping distant relations from one another. Collectively, they all believe that murder is both a duty to their god and a game for their enjoyment, and each member of Bhaal's church was expected to perform at least one murder every 10 days, specifically in the darkest moment of the dead of night if possible. However, murder is rarely ever so perfectly timed. Despite the fear he commanded, Bhaal's actual portfolio was subject to debate by most scholars. In his most common depictions, he was viewed as a figure that might have taken strength in violently punishing murderers and warmongers, while others had believed the more noble notion that he judged whether a murder was righteous or not. Yet still, many believe that he simply thrived off the act of murder itself, which was a belief stoked by his own half-mortal children, the Bhaal spawn. During the time that he was dead, Bhaal had many scattered cults, the most infamous being known as the Deathstalkers, who were one of the few sects who attempted to try and bring him back to life. As such, the Deathstalkers serve as the most well-known order upon his resurrection, but many others still exist. Bhaal is known to have 3 recorded avatars: a shape-shifting monstrosity called Khaz'goroth, a corpse-like male humanoid known simply as the Slayer, and a gargantuan beast known as the Ravager. While Khaz'goroth is simply an aspect of the god Malar that Bhaal controlled, the Lord of Murder often preferred to assume the form of the Slayer while in urban areas, so as to attempt some form of infiltration and blending in. While in this form he resembled a humanoid corpse with a feral face, bearing ivory skin that was inset with deep bleeding lacerations. The Ravager, which Bhaal assumed when visiting rural regions, was a 30-foot-tall monstrosity with a grimacing horned head and face that featured a mane, a flowing beard, and eyes filled with the flames of the lower planes. In some extreme cases, the Bhaal spawn, after Bhaal's death, were actually able to turn into creatures similar to these ones. In terms of allies and foes, Bhaal maintains a very strange relationship with his 2 former party members. Mirkul benefits from his acts of death, as Bhaal's victims become new members in his army, and Bane maintains power over strife and struggle, having very little use for an alliance with Bhaal since he likes to take care of his own business himself. Bhaal, alongside both Bane and Mirkul, was once served by the goddesses Talina and Loviatar while he was a greater deity. Beyond that, he is reviled by a majority of the other gods, specifically Shanti, Helm, Ilmater, Lathander, Lyra, and Tyr. And of course, there's the immense thirst for revenge that he shares against Cyric for stealing his power. And it is unknown whether or not he knows that Mask was involved in his slaying, having taken the form of the sword that killed him. Lastly, one more interesting bit of lore that I learned is that while he was still a god, Bhaal was served by an imp butler by the name of Kespinar, who I can imagine has stuck around with Bhaal since his days as a mortal, possibly being conscripted or contracted to provide aid in some way and having simply rode Bhaal's coattails ever since. Now, while I sadly haven't gotten a chance to portray Bhaal in any of my games, I would play him less as the psycho killer maniac that most lore depicts him as, and more as a cold and cunning individual, ultimately vengeful for the wrongs that he has suffered and keen to get his due, such as righting the wrong of losing the game of Knucklebones against Mirkul and Bane, and having his divinity stolen away by Cyric. He is also immensely careful with his movements and his plans, as due to Cyric's actions, Bhaal is still technically immortal and can be killed again by any adventurer who has the balls to try. As such, he keeps much of his information secret, portraying himself as godly as ever to his followers and slowly collecting a following of assassins, murderers, and killers. He unfortunately can't be as choosy as he was when he was originally a god, so he's grown to accept the more common murderer types into his fold, but still nurses a wish to regain the elegance and diligence of his former clergy. As such, Bhaal does all he can to make the best of his situation, but is still faced with the immense difficulty of having his former party members as gods who benefit from his choices, no matter which one he makes. If he kills Bane's followers, he gives Mirkul command over their dead bodies and their souls, and if he stays his hand to starve Mirkul of new blood, Bane's followers continue to wreak havoc and he himself gains no power, as no death has occurred. As such, I have him eternally searching for a new way to free himself from this cursed state of attrition, either by collecting a new domain from another god by force, from which he can draw new power, or by killing either of the 2 gods himself and usurping their power. Cyric is definitely a target in this endeavor, but due to his imprisonment within the demi-plane of the Supreme Throne, Bhaal can't exactly get to him without the risk of trapping himself in Cyric's place. In regards to characters and plot hooks, Bhaal's story is actually incredibly straightforward, with his efforts being predominantly focused on either depowering his former compatriots, or getting revenge against Cyric for his transgressions, or engaging in the act that grants him the most power: murder. Most of Bhaal's quests and divine purposes for his followers would be focused on enacting the death of important figures, ranging from political assassination to killing the priests of other faiths in order to weaken the gods they serve. I like to compare him mostly to Sithis from the Elder Scrolls series, a god who uses assassination and death as a way to guide the future according to what he wants, while taking the occasional contract to pay the bills. As such, Bhaal would certainly have a divine-focused assassination guild that your PCs, NPCs, or even villains could be a part of or even control, which in my world, the organization takes the name The Bloody Wreath, as a nod to his holy symbol, which is a skull with a swirling of blood around it. From this, the targets of these guilds and NPCs and PCs and such can range from a noble patron who the party has befriended, a high priest whose death would serve Bhaal's purposes, or even a corrupt noble official whose mismanagement of his land has led to so much random death that Bhaal can't really make any use of it. He is the god of ritualistic, intentional murder after all, so wanton death and destruction really does not serve him in any way. With that said, not all of Bhaal's worshippers have to be evil, and can worship the god in hopes that he will see them succeed in their murderous endeavors. Good-aligned worshippers can be paladins dedicated to smiting the scourge of evil, while evil-aligned worshippers can be the more bloodthirsty serial killer types, and everything in between. Murder, while a crime in most lawful civilizations, can serve both good and evil purposes, a fact that Bhaal may be very keen to take advantage of if he wishes to outgrow Bane and Mirkul in power. Lastly, our magic item for this week is simply titled The Knife of the Lord, our first vestige item as its power grows the more devoted the wielder becomes to its creator. In its first dormant form, the Knife of the Lord has a +1 bonus to all attack and damage rolls, and allows the wielder to cast the spell Invisibility once per short rest. Its second effect is that the first successful attack made against an enemy deals an additional 1d4 damage and marks them. Every successful attack made after this first 1d4 marking one increases the die increment by 1, so increasing a 1d4 to a 1d6, a 1d6 to a 1d8, and so on, leading to the maximum die being a 1d20. Upon killing an enemy, the die reduces back to a 1d4, and missing an attack does not increase nor lower the die's increment. In its second awakened form, the knife's bonus increases to a +2, and the wielder can now cast the spell Greater Invisibility once per long rest. Additionally, the wielder can now consume the mark placed on the enemy as a bonus action, causing it to suffer a penalty to its next attack roll, of which is equal to a roll of the increment damage die reached. So if your increment die has reached up to a d12, you roll a d12 and the target's next attack roll is subtracted the number you roll. In its final exalted form, the knife's bonus increases to a +3, and the wielder, upon killing an enemy that it is marked, can transfer the mark status to an enemy within 30 feet that it can see. When this is done, the damage die's increment does lower by 1, but its effect does continue and can be passed through multiple enemies, so long as you kill each one first, and have the bonus action to spend. I've included an item stat block in the description below. Bhaal's straightforwardness in regards to his story, intent, domains, and history makes him a very easy god to place in your world, though one does need to get a little more creative when it comes to keeping his portrayal from becoming tiresome. One can only deal with the mad, murdering god of chaos archetype for so long. I want to thank all you guys for watching, and if you guys want to watch any more D&D videos like this, please like, subscribe, and share the video to anybody that you think it might help, Dungeon Masters or players who are planning to align themselves with Bhaal specifically. And if you guys want a chance to vote on the next subject of the next video, then please follow me on Twitter and cast your vote in the polls in the coming day. Also, please comment down below how you guys have used or encountered Bhaal in your games, and what you guys would like to see in upcoming videos. Until then, I'll see you guys next time.